This antique marquetry table was badly damaged by woodworm and in need of some serious help, so I decided to restore it. Hello beautiful people and welcome to another video. In this one, I'll do my best to restore this once beautiful marquetry table that, as you can see, has some serious issues. There was a lot going on with this table and I didn't really know where to start. This strip of veneer around the edge of the table was incomplete and many pieces were missing, and pretty much everything left was delaminated, so I had to reglue it bit by bit. I had to test every single piece of veneer because some of them looked okay from a distance, but as soon as I tried to lift them, I could see that they were delaminated and needed regluing. I decided that the easiest place to start was to use the pieces that I actually had that came with the table and to reglue them. I used some tape to hold the veneer in place before I clamped it down, just to make sure it wouldn't move as it was drying. As you can imagine, this is something I had to do multiple times, and I'm not gonna make you watch all of it, but just so you have an idea how it worked and how I did it, I'll show you a few examples. I believe that the pieces of veneer I'm regluing is rosewood, and it's quite thick, which is great because that will give me a bit of wiggle room as far as sanding and making the repairs. But unfortunately, I don't have anything like that for the bits that are missing, so I'll need to improvise. These are the only pieces left from the trim that was screwed to the underside of the table, and it was made from solid wood originally. I'll need to make something like this. This piece had the most woodworm damage, and surprisingly, the rest of the table had little bits, but nothing serious like this. I used my woodworm treatment spray for this piece, which I believe is elm, and as far as I know, this is something that woodworm really likes, so possibly that's why this is the only bit affected. This is what I believe to be soot, and this is something that people used to collect from candles and lamps, and they would mix it with animal fat and use it for ink and wood stain. As you can see, this is coming off very easily, so this would transfer onto your clothes and your fingers, so it had to go. Once the soot grease thingy was gone, I could see all the damage. There was some old wood filler that was basically falling out and lots of serious cracks. Look, this is just powder basically. All just came out super easily. This one looks like it's all the way through the wood. This is basically what I did for about 2 days. I used my dental tool to check whether any pieces were lifting or not, and if they were, I used a syringe with some glue to inject it underneath, and then I would use a piece of tape to hold it in place before I applied some pressure with a clamp and I waited for that to dry.
2,000 years later.
This table came with this beautiful carved leg that was actually in a pretty good condition. So in order to actually see what I needed to do, if anything, to it, I gave it a good clean. Other than some few scuffs and minor scratches, this actually looked pretty nice, but obviously the old shellac looked pretty tired, so I had to refresh it. So because this is completely eaten by woodworm, I'm going to use some wood hardener. I'm going to saturate it really well so it just soaks in through all these holes and it gets inside the wood. Because this is an old table, I'm going to make some shellac to replenish the finish that was on the leg originally. If you've never heard of shellac, this is a natural product that you basically dissolve in alcohol, and this has been used for many years. You can buy it already pre-made and it's basically ready to use, or you can buy these flakes and they come in different colors and you basically dissolve it in alcohol and it takes a little while. You might have heard about 1 pound cut or 2 pound cut, and that basically means that 1 pound of shellac flakes is dissolved in 1 gallon of alcohol. And obviously I'm not gonna use that much because that would be a lot. So I'm just gonna make a little less. Basically it's 1 to 4 the way I'm gonna make it. You can make it a bit more concentrated or less depending on what you're going to do with it. Once it's done, you can always add a bit of alcohol or more flakes depending on what you need. This will take about 3 days to dissolve. I like to put this through a filter when this is all done just to make sure there's no impurities. And you can apply this with a brush, with a piece of cloth, you can spray it on, and shellac dissolves into the previous layer of shellac. So it's actually pretty easy to use. I was going to tell you that you can smash the flakes with a mallet to dissolve it quicker, but I did it in a separate jar and it actually took longer. There are probably several thousand holes in here. I'm just going to use this wood filler to cover all of them, and I will decide what I want to do next as far as staining and finishing. As you can see, I basically covered this entire piece of wood. That's how bad it is. I get a lot of comments from people saying that the tape is going to stick to the glue. Look how clean this is. Nothing stuck. Absolutely perfect. I'll need quite a lot of veneer to replace the missing bits. I've been thinking was the best way to do this because the grain goes this direction. So I can't use a long strip like this, and I'll just need to cut it into small pieces and shape it so it fits the curve of this line. I'm going to use a piece of tape and I'll copy the curve and I'll transfer it onto that piece of veneer and cut it to the right shape. Hope it makes sense. If not, you'll see in a minute what I'm doing. I didn't have veneer that was made from the same wood or of the same thickness, so I had to be a bit creative, but you'll see how I managed. And for the straight line, I'm just going to use my chisel. And for this curve, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife. The veneer I was using already had some glue on it, so I just needed to use my iron to melt it, and that made it a bit easier. And now I just need to do it like 55 more times. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to use my chisel and my X-Acto knife for the curvature, which I just follow the best I can because obviously I'm doing this by hand. So the good thing about using this type of veneer is that when the glue is melted, you can move it around and you can position it exactly where it needs to be, and then just hold it for a few seconds until the glue sets and just leave it. Just like this. To remove the excess veneer, I used veneer saw that one of you sent me, and then I did a little bit of sanding.
One eternity later.
So I decided that before I try regluing all the individual pieces, I'm going to try and use this piece of brown paper and my iron and see if I can reactivate the glue that's already underneath. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, oh well, I'll just reglue the whole thing. I am going to remove this finish anyway, so I'm not worried that it's gonna melt or come off. I didn't know what glue was used for this table, but I was just hoping that it would at least reactivate some of it and save me a little bit of work. So it's working actually quite well. This little piece isn't completely flat. It helped a lot, but it still needs a little bit of glue. I'm gonna try to squeeze some of this CA glue underneath. In case you're wondering, the reason I'm using CA glue and activator is because it would be very difficult for me to clamp that veneer down if I used regular glue. This is literally just the edge. It's not really lifting any farther than the edge, so let's see if this helps. No movement at all. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a good example. This whole piece is lifting. Let's see if I can reglue it with the iron. The iron flattened this a little bit because it warmed up the veneer. See, it's completely flat now. So I've been thinking for a little bit how to go about restoring this top because there are some very heavy scratches. There are also some bits missing that I'll need to fill in with something. I did a little bit of testing over here just to make sure that this is not stained. So when I sand this down a little bit, there will still be a difference in color between all the different bits. This isn't exactly flat. I mean, if you look at this, it's just old, so I want to flatten this a little bit and remove some of the scratches because it is pretty beat up. The difference in thickness between the new veneer and the old veneer, when I sand this down, it will even this out and make it look better. I'm not sure if it's just because this table was so old and the veneer has shrunk a little bit, but there were gaps everywhere surrounding the inlaid pieces, so I used a little bit of regular glue and some sawdust to fill those in. I think I might spend the entire day doing this. Oh well. That took a while. So this looks like it's mostly intact. There's one bit of veneer that needs regluing, and there's a chunk of wood missing. So I'll need to fix this. If you're still watching this video, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate all of you guys who subscribe to my channel. That means a lot to me. And especially all of you who are channel members, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do without you. If you'd like to support me and allow me to do what I do, you can find all the links in the description for my Buy Me a Coffee, my Amazon wishlist link, or you can hit the Super Thanks button. Thank you. I think this might be elm, and as far as I know, elm is something that woodworm really like. So maybe that's why only this piece is affected so badly. In case you're wondering, I was sanding this on low speed with 180 grit, and I was very careful. And because I could see the edge of the veneer as I was doing the repairs, I knew exactly how thick it was and I wasn't too worried. So this was a bit scary because I thought maybe I would remove the stain while sanding, but I've been actually able to refresh it and remove all the scratches, and this still has all the colors. I may need to touch up a little bit, but actually I think it's gonna look great with the finish on. There were quite a few of small chunks of wood missing and some holes underneath the table, so I used some epoxy putty to repair those. There was actually no movement, so I decided to put Bondo in, and also I'm gonna have the apron that will be screwed into this, so I'm not worried about it. So the shellac that I made a couple days prior was ready. I diluted it a bit with alcohol to make it easier for my sprayer, and I sprayed it on the leg. I do realize that my gun wasn't adjusted properly, but that's okay, because shellac dries really quickly. When the epoxy was cured, I sanded it smooth, and it was time to try and make the new veneer blend in with the old one. teak, mahogany, and rosewood water-based stains, and I'll try and find the best matching color so I can make this walnut look like this veneer. Unfortunately, this didn't work at all, and I think the difference between the walnut veneer that I used for the repairs and the rosewood veneer that was on the table originally was just too big, and none of the stains that I tried worked, so I had to come up with plan B. I don't know if you remember, but the rim of this table was originally black and it was stained with that soot mixed with animal fat thing, so I decided to stain it black as well. And the same goes for the bottom of the table. But I'm just using more modern stain, so this is not going to come off when you touch it. So this is my plan B. Because the stains didn't work, I decided to use lacquer toner, but in order for me to use it, I had to tape off everything else, so I wouldn't spray it on the bits that I didn't want any color on. And yes, it took as long as you think it did. So I started off with fairly light walnut color, but I think the difference between the new veneer and the old one was just too big, so this wasn't working. So I actually wiped everything off and I started again with darker walnut color. And fortunately, this did the trick. When the lacquer toner dried, I decided to color match the rim of this table as well, but you will see this later in the video. In order for that piece of wood that I glued in previously to fit perfectly, I had to do a little bit of shaping. Just like that. And because there was a bit of veneer missing, I just used some repair wax to fill in that spot. And this is the color matching that I told you before. I'm basically making sure that the rim of the table and the strip of veneer that I color matched before are the same color. And I also did the same thing for this ring thing. And if you remember from the beginning of the video, the whole round trim bit that was underneath the table was missing. So I basically cut lots of strips of wood and I glued them together into a panel that was big enough to cut a circle from. And while waiting for the glue to dry, I applied some oil to the tabletop, which was looking gorgeous. And to make sure that the underside of the table, which was now black, matched this bit of wood that was eaten by woodworm previously, I color matched this as well. And then I applied a bit more oil. Did I mention that this was looking gorgeous? When the panel was dry, I cut it in half and I glued it again to make it more square shape so I could actually cut the circle out of it. And rather than helping me with the project, Hugo finally decided to show up when I was pretty much done with it to inspect it and give me the final approval. And as always, the lack of opposing thumbs was his excuse for not helping me. In order to cut the ring trim thing for the bottom of the table, I had to make some sort of jig for my router so I could actually use it this way. This is actually pretty simple. I cut a piece of plywood, then unscrewed the base plate from my planche base for my Makita router, and I marked the holes so I could actually screw the piece of plywood into the planche base for the router. And that's it. I hope it makes sense. I also rounded the corners on the piece of plywood just so it looks nicer, but that's completely optional. I also cut a kind of circular shape out of a piece of plywood that would fit under the board that I was cutting the circle from, just so I wouldn't cut into the bench with my router. For the circle that I was cutting, this board didn't need to be super nice, but I just used a planer to smooth out the joints just to make it easier for myself. If you remember, this is what the original ring trim thing was attached to, so I just used it as a template for the shape and the size that I needed to cut out, and then I just took shallow paths one after another and I cut out the ring. And because this is not a heavy-duty router, it's just a trim router, I made sure to go really slow just so I wouldn't break the bit or, hurt myself. And what do you know? I cut a circle. To make sure that the ring I was cutting was the same width as the original one, I just used one of those pieces that was still attached to the table when I got it as a guide. And because the original trim had some sort of decorative edge on it, I used my router table to get something similar. And then I applied some oil to the bottom of the tabletop, and then I screwed on that piece that the leg attaches to. And for the two of you who care, I made sure the screws were turned the same direction. And I'm almost done with the project. I can't wait for you guys to see the final results. I'm super happy with how this turned out, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.